The distress beacon had been screaming into the void of space for 72 hours before anyone heard it. The signal was weak and broken, traveling across millions of kilometers of empty darkness until it finally reached the sensors of the human vessel Ironclad. The ship was on a routine patrol near the edge of the system, far from Earth and far from any help. Commander Daniel Hayes was in his quarters when the alert came through. He had been sleeping for the first time in 30 hours, his body finally giving in to exhaustion. The sharp sound of the alarm pulled him back to consciousness, and within seconds he was on his feet and moving toward the bridge. His boots echoed against the metal floors of the ship as he walked with purpose through the narrow corridors. When he arrived on the bridge, his crew was already at their stations. Lieutenant Price stood near the communications console, her face pale as she listened to the decoded message. She looked up when Daniel entered, and he could see the weight of what she had heard in her eyes. "Play it," Daniel ordered as he took his seat in the command chair. Nodded and pressed a button on her console. The bridge fell silent as a voice filled the air. It was high and trembling, speaking in a language that the ship's computer translated in real time. "This is the diplomatic convoy requesting immediate assistance. We are under attack by raiders. Our shields are failing. We have 17,000 civilians aboard, including children and elders. Please, if anyone can hear this message, we need help. They are going to board us. They are going to take us. Please." The message repeated, looping back to the beginning with the same desperate words. Daniel listened to it twice before raising his hand to signal to stop the playback. They were known throughout the galaxy as one of the most peaceful species in existence. They had no military, no weapons, and no desire for conflict of any kind. They believed that all intelligent life was inherently good, and that violence was simply a failure of communication. When humanity had first made contact with the galactic community, they had been among the first to welcome them. They had offered friendship and trade and cultural exchange without asking for anything in return. Daniel had met ambassadors on several occasions. They were gentle beings with soft voices and large, trusting eyes. The idea of them being hunted by raiders made something cold and hard settle in his chest. They were the opposite of in every way. They were raiders and slavers who traveled from system to system taking whatever they wanted. They preyed on the weak because the weak could not fight back. The Galactic Council had condemned their actions countless times, but condemnation meant nothing to creatures who cared only for profit and power. "How far?" Daniel asked, his voice steady. Lieutenant Commander Park checked the navigation display. 4 hours at maximum burn, sir, but that would put significant stress on the engines. Regulations say we should maintain standard speed and contact the Interstellar Council for guidance." Daniel did not respond immediately. He stared at which showed nothing but stars and empty space. Somewhere out there, 17,000 innocent people were waiting to be captured and sold into slavery. They were waiting for someone to save them. "Sir," spoke up carefully, "Galactic Protocol requires us to file a formal request before engaging in any military action. The signed non-intervention treaties with multiple species. If we interfere without authorization, there could be serious diplomatic consequences." "I am aware of the protocols," Daniel replied. "The Council could sanction Earth. They could restrict our trade agreements or limit our access to certain systems. This could affect millions of people back home." Daniel turned to look at her. His expression was calm, but there was something in his eyes that made take a small step back. "How long would it take to get Council approval?" he asked. Hesitated. "At least 12 hours for an emergency session, possibly longer if there are objections." "And how long until they finish what they started?" She did not answer. She did not need to. They both knew that 12 hours was far too long. By the time the Council finished debating, they would be gone. They would be loaded onto ships and taken to some distant corner of the galaxy where they would spend the rest of their lives in chains. Daniel turned back to He thought about the words in the distress signal. He thought about the fear in that voice, the desperation of someone who knew they were about to lose everything. He thought about what it meant to be human. On Earth, humans had survived against impossible odds for thousands of years. They had faced predators with nothing but sharpened sticks. They had endured ice ages that covered entire continents in frost. They had fought plagues that wiped out half their population. And through it all, they had refused to give up. They had clawed and scraped and struggled their way to survival, and eventually they had reached the stars. The galaxy called Earth because everything on it was designed to kill. The plants were poisonous. The animals were vicious. The weather could destroy entire cities in a matter of hours. Humans were not supposed to exist, and yet they did. They had taken a world that wanted them dead and made it their home. Navigation, Daniel said finally, set an intercept course for the convoy. Maximum burn. Looked at him with wide eyes. Sir, the regulations. I heard you the first time. Set the course. There was a moment of silence on the bridge. Every member of the crew understood what this decision meant. They would be breaking galactic law. They would be putting their careers and possibly their lives at risk. And they would be doing it without any guarantee of success. But not one of them objected. Turned back to his console and began entering the coordinates. Course set, Commander. Engaging maximum burn in 30 seconds. Weapons Officer, Daniel continued, looking at Chief Tactical Officer Cole. I want every system we have brought online and ready. When we arrive, there will be no warnings and no negotiations. We are going to hit them hard and fast, and we are not going to stop until every single one of those raiders is floating debris. Nodded, his fingers already moving across his console. Understood, sir. Bringing all weapon systems to full readiness. Stepped closer to Daniel, lowering her voice so only he could hear. The Council will demand an explanation. They will want to know why we acted without authorization. Daniel met her gaze without hesitation. Then I will give them one. I will tell them that 17,000 innocent people were going to die, and we were the only ones close enough to stop it. I will tell them that humans do not stand by and watch while the helpless are slaughtered. And if they have a problem with that, they can take it up with me personally. The ironclad's engines roared to life, pushing the ship forward at speeds that made the hull groan in protest. They were 4 hours away from the convoy, 4 hours away from a fight that could change everything. Daniel settled back in his chair and watched the stars blur past on the. He did not know what they would find when they arrived. He did not know if they would survive the battle ahead. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. They had made a terrible mistake. They had attacked the innocent in front of humanity, and humanity was coming. The ironclad dropped out of faster-than-light travel at combat distance, a maneuver so dangerous that most species considered it impossible. The ship shuddered violently as it tore through the fabric of space and time, emerging from the void like a predator bursting from the shadows. Warning lights flashed across every console on the bridge, and the hull screamed under the stress of forces it was never designed to withstand. But the ship held together. It always did. Commander Daniel Hayes gripped the arms of his chair as the cleared and showed him exactly what they had come to face. 6 warships surrounded 3 damaged transports. The transports were massive vessels, designed to carry thousands of passengers in comfort and safety. Now they drifted helplessly, their shields flickering and failing, their hulls by weapon fire. They had been taking their time. They enjoyed the hunt, enjoyed watching their prey struggle and suffer before the final capture. They had been circling the ships like wolves around wounded deer, savoring the moment before they moved in for the kill. They had not expected company. Contact, human vessel detected. One of the officers reported to his commander, Warlord, single ship, unknown class. It just appeared out of nowhere. Turned his attention to the tactical display, his scaled face twisting into an expression of annoyance. He had been raiding helpless convoys for 40 years, and in all that time, no one had ever come to interfere. The galaxy was full of species who talked about justice and morality, but when the moment came to act, they always found reasons to look away. One ship, said with contempt. They send one ship against 6. Are humans truly this arrogant or simply this stupid? He would have his answer in seconds. On the bridge of the ironclad, Cole had already locked weapons onto the nearest raider. His hands moved across his console with practiced precision, activating targeting systems and charging weapons that had been designed for exactly this kind of moment. The rail guns hummed with power. The missile batteries stood ready. The directed energy weapons glowed with barely contained fury. "All weapons locked and ready, Commander," reported. Daniel did not hesitate. "Fire." The ironclad erupted with violence. Railgun rounds tore through space at incredible speeds, punching through the shields of the first raider like they were made of paper. Missiles followed close behind, slamming into the hull and detonating with devastating force. The raider did not even have time to return fire before it exploded, sending debris spinning in every direction. The entire attack took less than 10 seconds. On the command ship, stared at the wreckage of his vessel with disbelief. One shot. The humans had destroyed one of his ships with a single coordinated attack. It was not possible. It should not have been possible. "All vessels focus fire on the human ship," he ordered, his voice rising with something that sounded almost like panic. "Destroy them now." The remaining 5 raiders turned their weapons toward the ironclad and opened fire. Energy beams and projectiles streaked across space, converging on the human vessel from multiple angles. The ironclad's shields flared bright as they absorbed the impact, but warning alarms began to sound across the ship. "Shields at 70%, reported Lieutenant Price from her station. "They are hitting us hard." "Evasive maneuvers," Daniel ordered, "and keep firing. Do not give them a chance to coordinate." Lieutenant Commander Park threw the ship into a series of movements that would have been impossible for any other species. The ironclad twisted and rolled through space, dodging incoming fire while maintaining its offensive assault. Humans had been fighting wars for thousands of years, and they had gotten very good at it. Locked onto the second raider and unleashed another barrage. This ship tried to evade, but it was too slow and too clumsy. The rail gun rounds found their mark, and the raider crumpled under the assault. Its engine section exploded, and the rest of the ship followed moments later. "Two down," announced without a trace of emotion in his voice. They were not prepared for this kind of fight. They were raiders, not warriors. They hunted the weak because the weak could not fight back. They had never faced an enemy who refused to run, who refused to surrender, who came at them with nothing but aggression and fury. Engineering Officer Tyler worked frantically below decks, trying to keep the ship together as damage reports flooded in from every section. A hull breach on Deck 4 was venting atmosphere into space. Power fluctuations were threatening the weapons systems. The engines were running hot from the maximum burn that had brought them here. "Hull breach sealed," Tyler reported over the communication system. "But we cannot take much more of this. The ship was not designed for sustained combat against multiple enemies." "She will hold," Daniel replied. "She has to." The ironclad drove straight into the heart of the formation, a move so aggressive that it caught the raiders completely off guard. At close range, the human weapons were even more devastating. Targeted the third raider and fired everything he had. The ship's shields collapsed under the onslaught, and the hull was torn apart by the follow-up assault. 3 down. Warlord watched his fleet die and felt something cold spreading through his chest. He had raided 100 convoys and faced 100 enemies who begged for mercy or tried to flee. He had never faced anything like this. The humans were not fighting like a rational species. They were fighting like animals, savage and relentless and utterly without fear. "Fall back," ordered. "All ships fall back and regroup." But it was too late for that. The fourth raider tried to turn and run, but anticipated the move and positioned the ironclad to cut off its escape. Fired a precision shot that disabled the raider's engines, leaving it drifting helplessly in space. The fifth raider managed to put some distance between itself and the battle, but it did not get far. A missile locked onto its signature and chased it across the void, slamming into its engineering section and crippling the vessel. In less than 15 minutes, the raiding fleet had been reduced to burning wreckage. Only the command ship remained functional, and it was surrounded by debris and the vengeful presence of the ironclad. Daniel stood from his chair and walked toward the. He looked at the damaged transports, still drifting but now safe from immediate harm. He looked at the crippled vessels, their crews scrambling to contain fires and seal breaches. He looked at the command ship, where Warlord was no doubt trying to understand what had just happened. "Open a channel to the ships," Daniel ordered. Made the connection, and a moment later a trembling voice came through the speakers. "This is the convoy. We received your assistance. We do not understand. Who are you? Why did you come?" Daniel leaned toward the communication pickup. "This is Commander Daniel Hayes of the Earth vessel Ironclad. We heard your distress signal. We came to help." There was a long pause before the voice spoke again. "You came for us. You fought for us. We are strangers to you, and yet you risked everything." "That is what humans do," Daniel replied simply. "Now hold tight. We are going to get you out of here." He turned to his crew, who were battered and exhausted but still standing at their posts. They had done the impossible. They had faced overwhelming odds and emerged victorious. But the fight was not over yet. "Prepare boarding parties," Daniel ordered. "We are going to pay Warlord a visit." Boarding shuttle detached from the ironclad and moved toward the command ship with quiet determination. Inside, 12 human soldiers sat in silence, checking their weapons and armor one final time before the assault. They were trained for moments like this, prepared to face danger and violence without hesitation. Sergeant led the team. He was a tall man with broad shoulders and eyes that had seen too much suffering in his 35 years of life. He had grown up in the broken streets of old Detroit, where poverty and desperation were constant companions. He had watched friends die from violence and neglect, and he had learned early that the universe did not care about fairness or justice. If you wanted something to change, you had to change it yourself. The military had given a purpose. It had taken his anger and shaped it into something useful. Now, he used that anger to protect the people who could not protect themselves. "Listen up," said to his team as the shuttle approached the vessel. "We go in fast and hard. Secure the corridors, neutralize any resistance, and find the prisoners. Commander Hayes wants Warlord alive if possible, but do not hesitate to defend yourselves. These raiders have been selling innocent people into slavery for decades. They will not surrender easily." The soldiers nodded in understanding. They knew what kind of enemy they were facing. They were brutal and ruthless, creatures who viewed other species as nothing more than merchandise to be bought and sold. They would fight to protect their operation, and they would show no mercy to anyone who stood in their way. The shuttle docked with a heavy clang, and the airlock hissed open. Was the first through the door, his weapon raised and ready. The corridor beyond was dimly lit and filled with the smell of smoke and fear. Emergency alarms wailed in the distance, and the floor was littered with debris from the damage the ironclad had inflicted. "Move," ordered, and his team flowed into the ship like water through a broken dam. They encountered their first resistance within 30 seconds. A group of soldiers rounded a corner and opened fire, their energy weapons flashing in the darkness. Dropped to one knee and returned fire with precise, controlled bursts. 2 fell before they could take cover. The rest tried to retreat, but Corporal flanked them from a side corridor and cut off their escape. The firefight lasted less than a minute. When it was over, 6 soldiers lay dead on the floor, and the human team had not suffered a single casualty. "Keep moving," said. "The holding cells should be 3 decks down." They descended through the ship, clearing each section with ruthless efficiency. They tried to mount a defense, but they were disorganized and panicked. They had never faced an enemy like this before. They had never fought against soldiers who moved with such coordination and purpose. On the third deck, found what he was looking for. A heavy door blocked the entrance to the holding area, sealed with electronic locks and guarded by 2 soldiers. The guards saw the humans approaching and raised their weapons, but they never got a chance to fire. Put them down with 2 quick shots, and then he turned his attention to the door. "Get it open," he ordered. Private moved forward with a cutting tool and began working on the lock. Sparks flew as the blade sliced through metal, and within moments the door groaned and swung open. The smell hit them first. It was the stench of unwashed bodies and despair, the smell of beings who had been kept in cages for far too long. Stepped through the doorway and found himself in a large chamber filled with cells. Each cell was barely large enough for a person to stand, and each one contained a prisoner. There were 63 of them. Men, women, and children taken from previous raids and held aboard the command ship until they could be transported to the slave markets. They looked at the human soldiers with wide, terrified eyes, pressing themselves against the backs of their cages as if trying to disappear. Lowered his weapon and removed his helmet. He wanted them to see his face, to understand that he meant them no harm. "It is all right," he said, keeping his voice soft and calm. "You are safe now. We are here to take you home." They did not respond. They had been captives for so long that they had forgotten what hope felt like. They stared at with expressions of confusion and disbelief, unable to process what was happening. Moved to the nearest cell, where a young child huddled in the corner. The child was small and thin, with large eyes that reflected the dim light of the chamber. She could not have been more than 5 or 6 years old by human standards, and she was shaking with fear. Knelt down to bring herself to the child's level. She reached out a hand, palm open and empty, offering nothing but comfort. "Hey there, little one," she said gently. "My name is, I know you are scared, but I promise you that the bad people cannot hurt you anymore. We came a very long way to find you, and we are going to make sure you get back to your family." The child stared at her for a long moment, trembling. Then slowly, she reached out and touched his armored glove. Her small fingers traced the hard surface of the metal, feeling its warmth and solidity. And for the first time in what must have been months, she stopped shaking. "That is it," whispered. "You are going to be okay, I promise." Watched the interaction and felt something shift in his chest. This was why he fought. This was why he put on the armor and picked up the weapon day after day. Not for glory or medals or recognition, but for moments like this. For the chance to reach into the darkness and pull someone back into the light. "Get these cells open," he ordered his team. "Every single one, and then get these people to the shuttle." The soldiers moved quickly, cutting locks and opening doors one by one. The prisoners emerged slowly, hesitantly, as if they expected the humans to change their minds at any moment. But the soldiers treated them with nothing but kindness, guiding them toward the exit and helping those who were too weak to walk on their own. Left in charge of the evacuation and took a smaller team deeper into the ship. He still had one more objective to complete. Warlord was on the bridge, surrounded by the last of his loyal soldiers. They had barricaded the entrance and prepared for a final stand, but had no patience for delays. He ordered his team to breach the door, and within seconds they were through. The bridge was chaos. Soldiers fired wildly, their shots going wide in their panic, and his team responded with cold precision, dropping enemies one by one until only remained. The warlord stood at the center of the bridge, his weapon raised and his eyes burning with hatred. "You cannot do this," snarled. "I am a warlord of the Empire. I have rights under galactic law. You are committing an act of war." Walked toward him slowly, his weapon trained on the warlord's chest. "You kidnapped innocent people," said. "You put children in cages. You were going to sell them like animals." He stopped a few feet away from, close enough to see the fear behind the hatred in the warlord's eyes. "Where I come from, we have a word for creatures like you. We call you monsters, and we do not negotiate with monsters." Moved fast, disarming with a single swift motion and forcing him to his knees. The warlord struggled, but it was useless. Human strength was far greater than this, a product of evolution on a world where weakness meant death. Warlord said, "You are now a prisoner of the Earth Defense Force. Commander Hayes would like to have a word with you." Warlord was dragged onto the bridge of the ironclad in heavy restraints, his arms bound behind his back and his legs chained together. The proud raider who had terrorized dozens of star systems now stumbled and fell to his knees before Commander Daniel Hayes, reduced to nothing more than a defeated prisoner. The bridge crew watched in silence as his team positioned the warlord in front of the command chair. They had all seen the holding cells on the ship. They had all watched the prisoners emerge from their cages, thin and broken and barely alive. There was no sympathy in their eyes for the creature who had put them there. Daniel stood from his chair and walked slowly toward. He stopped a few feet away and looked down at the warlord with an expression that was completely calm. There was no anger on his face, no hatred, no visible emotion of any kind, and somehow that made it worse. "Do you know why the galaxy calls Eartha?" Daniel asked. Said nothing. He simply glared up at the human with defiance, refusing to show weakness even in his current position. "I will tell you," Daniel continued. "Our planet is one of the most hostile environments in the known universe. The gravity is crushing. The weather is violent. The plants produce toxins that can kill in minutes, and the animals are predators designed by evolution to hunt and kill without mercy." He began to walk in a slow circle around the kneeling warlord. "Humans evolved in that environment. We survived not because we were the strongest or the fastest, but because we refused to give up. When predators hunted us, we hunted them back. When the ice came, we built fires. When disease swept through our populations, we learned medicine. For thousands of years, our world tried to kill us, and we kept fighting until we conquered it." Daniel stopped in front of again. "The other species in this galaxy look at us and see something that should not exist. They see a civilization that crawled out of hell and reached for the stars. They welcomed us into their community because they hoped our strength would protect them, but they have always been afraid of what we might become." Finally spoke, his voice rough and filled with contempt. "You think this scares me? You are just one ship. The Empire has hundreds of vessels. When word of this reaches they will send a fleet to destroy you." Daniel smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I am counting on that," he said. "I want them to know exactly what happened here. I want every raider and slaver in this sector to hear about the day a single human ship destroyed 5 warships and captured their warlord. I want them to understand that the rules have changed." He turned to Lieutenant Price at the communications console. "Open a channel, all frequencies. Make sure this transmission reaches every corner of space." Nodded and began working at her station. "Channel open, Commander. Broadcasting on all frequencies." Daniel straightened his uniform and turned to face the main. Behind him, the stars stretched out in an endless field of light, cold and indifferent to the drama unfolding in their midst. "This is Commander Daniel Hayes of the Earth Defense Force vessel Ironclad," he began, his voice steady and clear. 72 hours ago, a raiding fleet attacked a diplomatic convoy carrying 17,000 civilian passengers. The raiders believed their targets were helpless. They believed no one would come to save them. They believed they could continue their crimes without consequence. He paused, letting his words sink in. "They were wrong. We came, and we destroyed them." On worlds throughout the sector, stopped what they were doing and listened. Raider captains aboard distant vessels heard the message and felt something cold settle in their stomachs. Slave traders in their markets fell silent as the human's voice echoed through their speakers. "Let me be clear about something," Daniel continued. Humans do not care about your politics. We do not care about your treaties or your traditions or your justifications for cruelty. What we care about is this. When innocent people call for help, we answer. When the helpless are attacked, we defend them. And when monsters like Warlord prey upon the weak, we hunt them down and make them pay. He gestured to, who forced to turn and face the warlord's image was broadcast across the stars, a proud warrior brought low and displayed for all to see. This is what remains of your fearsome warlord. This is what happens when you draw the attention of Earth. Remember this moment. Remember what we did to his fleet with a single ship, and ask yourselves a question. Daniel leaned closer to Is it worth it? Is whatever profit you make from raiding and slaving worth the risk of us coming for you? Because we will. Wherever you are, whatever you are doing, if you harm the innocent, we will find you. We will not negotiate. We will not show mercy. We will end you. He stepped back and raised his chin. Earth has spoken. Let the galaxy listen. Cut the transmission, and the bridge fell silent. The crew looked at their commander with a mixture of awe and concern. What he had just done was unprecedented. He had openly challenged an entire empire, daring them to retaliate. The consequences could be catastrophic. But Daniel did not seem worried. He returned to his command chair and sat down as if he had just finished a routine status report. Navigation, he said calmly, set a course for the nearest. We need to get the refugees to safety and arrange transport to there. Yes, sir, replied. Engineering, how are we looking? Tyler's voice came through the communication system. We have taken significant damage, Commander. Hull breaches on 3 decks, power fluctuations in the weapons systems, and the engines are running at 80% efficiency. We can make it but we will need extensive repairs. Understood. Do what you can to keep us together. Approached Daniel's chair, her expression troubled. Commander, that transmission. The Interstellar Council will not be pleased. We have essentially declared war on the Empire. We have done nothing of the sort, Daniel replied. We responded to a distress signal and defended innocent civilians. Everything else was simply stating facts. Facts that could be interpreted as threats. Let them interpret it however they want. Daniel looked at her with calm certainty. They were going to be sold into slavery. Children were going to spend the rest of their lives in chains. We stopped that. If the council has a problem with how we stopped it, they can file a complaint. Wanted to argue, but she could see there was no point. Daniel had made his decision, and he would stand by it regardless of the consequences. That was simply who he was. On the lower decks, the refugees were being settled into temporary quarters. Medical officer Sandra moved among them, treating injuries and providing comfort where she could. Many of the refugees were still in shock, unable to fully process their sudden rescue. They had been certain they were going to die or worse, and now they were safe aboard a human ship surrounded by creatures they barely understood. The young child who had touched armored glove was sitting in a corner, wrapped in a thermal blanket and clutching a cup of warm liquid. She watched the humans move around her with wide, curious eyes, no longer afraid but still uncertain. Sat down beside her. Feeling better? She asked. The child nodded slowly. What is your name? Myra, the child replied in a small voice. That is a beautiful name, Myra. I told you before that we would take you home, and I meant it. You are going to see your family again. I promise. Myra looked up at her with those large, trusting eyes. Why did you come for us? We are not your people. We are strangers. Smiled gently. Because that is what humans do, Myra. We help each other, all of us, the whole galaxy. And when someone is in trouble, we do not look the other way. We fight. We protect. We save. It is just who we are. Myra considered this for a long moment, turning the words over in her young mind. Then she leaned against side and closed her eyes, finally allowing herself to rest. Above them, the stars continued to burn, indifferent to the small acts of kindness and courage that unfolded in their light. But somewhere in the darkness, a message was spreading. Word of what humans had done. Word of what humans were capable of. And across the sector, raiders and slavers began to reconsider their choices. 3 weeks had passed since the battle in the system. The ironclad had been repaired and returned to service, its hull patched and its weapon systems restored to full functionality. The refugees had been transported to there, reunited with families who had given them up for dead. And Commander Daniel Hayes had been summoned to answer for his actions before the Interstellar Council. The council chamber was an enormous circular room located at the heart of the galactic capital. Representatives from over 100 different species sat in tiered rows that rose toward the ceiling, their faces displaying every emotion from curiosity to outrage. Holographic translators floated in the air, converting each speaker's words into languages that everyone could understand. Daniel stood at the center of the chamber, alone except for Ambassador, who represented humanity's interests. He wore his dress uniform and stood at attention, refusing to show any sign of discomfort despite the hundreds of eyes fixed upon him. The delegate was the first to speak. There were crystalline beings who communicated through vibrations in their mineral bodies, and their translator rendered their words in a cold, sharp tone. Commander Hayes acted without authorization from this council. He violated 17 different treaties regarding military engagement in neutral space. He destroyed 5 vessels belonging to a sovereign power and took a high-ranking official prisoner. These are acts of war, and they cannot be ignored. Murmurs of agreement rippled through parts of the chamber. Several delegates nodded their heads or made gestures of support. Furthermore, the continued, Commander Hayes broadcast a message that could only be interpreted as a threat against the entire empire. He has put the stability of this entire sector at risk with his reckless behavior. The delegate finished speaking and sat back, clearly satisfied with the case presented against humanity. Rose from her seat and walked to stand beside Daniel. She was a small woman with gray hair and sharp eyes, a veteran diplomat who had spent decades navigating the complex politics of the galactic community. She looked around the chamber with an expression of calm determination. The delegate from is correct that Commander Hayes acted without council authorization, she began. He did engage forces without filing the proper paperwork. He did broadcast a message that expressed humanity's position in rather direct terms. All of this is true. She paused and let her gaze sweep across the assembled representatives. But let us also acknowledge what else is true. 17,000 civilians were about to be captured and sold into slavery. They sent a distress signal that was received by Commander Hayes and his crew. They asked for help, and humanity answered. The delegate rose from her seat. She was a tall, slender being with iridescent skin and large eyes that reflected the light of the chamber. When she spoke, her voice was soft but carried clearly to every corner of the room. The people wish to express our eternal gratitude to Commander Hayes and the crew of the Ironclad. They saved 17,000 of our citizens, including many children who would have spent their lives in bondage. We do not see their actions as violations of treaties. We see them as acts of heroism. The treaties exist for a reason, another delegate interrupted. If every species simply ignores them whenever they feel justified, the entire framework of galactic cooperation collapses. And what good is that framework, replied, if it allows innocent people to be taken as slaves while the rest of us debate procedure? They have been raiding civilian convoys for decades. This council has condemned their actions countless times, but condemnation has not stopped them. Meanwhile, entire populations have been carried off in chains. She turned to face the delegates directly. Humanity did not join this community to stand by and watch while the helpless suffer. We joined because we believed that together we could build something better, but we will not sacrifice our principles on the altar of political convenience. When innocents cry out for help, We will answer. That is not negotiable. The chamber erupted in argument. Delegates shouted at each other, some supporting humanity's position and others demanding punishment for the treaty violations. The noise grew louder and louder until the council chair, a massive being from the species, raised a limb for silence. Enough, the chair declared. This debate could continue for months and we would be no closer to a resolution. The facts are these. Commander Hayes broke several treaties. Commander Hayes also saved 17,000 lives. Both things are true and we must find a way to address both. The chair turned to look at Daniel. Commander Hayes, do you have anything to say in your own defense? Daniel stepped forward. He had been silent throughout the proceedings, listening to the arguments and counterarguments without expression. Now he looked around the chamber with eyes that held no apology. I did what I believed was right, he said simply. When I heard that distress signal, I knew that waiting for council approval meant those people would die. I knew that filing paperwork and attending committee meetings meant children would be sold to the highest bidder. So I made a choice. I chose to act. He paused and took a deep breath. You can sanction Earth if you want. You can restrict our trade agreements or limit our access to certain systems. I will accept whatever punishment you decide is appropriate. But I will not apologize for saving innocent lives. I will not pretend that I would do anything differently if I had the chance to go back. And I will not promise to stand down the next time someone calls for help. He looked directly at the delegate. You are right that my actions could have consequences. They might seek revenge. Other species might use my example as justification for their own military actions. The stability of the sector might be threatened. But here is what you are not considering. The message I broadcast was heard by every raider and slaver within range. They know now that humanity is watching. They know that if they prey upon the innocent, we will come for them. Daniel's voice hardened. In the 3 weeks since that broadcast, attacks on civilian convoys in this sector have dropped by 60%. Slave markets are reporting decreased traffic. Raiders are changing their routes to avoid areas where human ships patrol. My actions may have broken treaties, but they have also saved countless lives that will never appear in any report. The chamber fell silent. The delegates looked at each other, uncertain how to respond. Finally, the representative spoke again. The people move that no sanctions be imposed on Earth or Commander Hayes. We further move that this council consider adopting a more active approach to protecting civilian vessels from raider attacks. If humanity is willing to fight for those who cannot fight for themselves, perhaps it is time for the rest of us to do the same. The vote took hours. Arguments were made on both sides, compromises were proposed and rejected, and alliances shifted as delegates reconsidered their positions. But in the end, the motion passed. No sanctions would be imposed on Earth. Instead, the Council agreed to form a joint task force dedicated to combating piracy and slavery in the sector, with humanity playing a leading role. Daniel left the chamber feeling tired but satisfied, walked beside him, a small smile on her face. That was quite a speech, she said. I meant every word. I know you did, that is why it worked. They emerged from the council building into the light of an alien sun. Ships moved through the sky above them, representatives from 100 different worlds going about their business. The galaxy was vast and complex, filled with dangers and wonders beyond imagination. But somewhere out there, a young child named Myra was safe in her home, surrounded by family who had thought they would never see her again. Somewhere out there, raiders were reconsidering their choices, wondering if the next convoy they attacked might draw the attention of humanity. Somewhere out there, the message Daniel had broadcast continued to spread, carried from system to system by those who had heard it. Earth had spoken, and the galaxy had listened. Daniel looked up at the stars and thought about all the people still out there who needed help. There would be more distress signals, more battles, more difficult choices. but humanity would face them the same way they had always faced challenges. Together, without fear, and without mercy for those who preyed upon the weak. That was simply who they were,